knows that I love Broadway. I talk about it a lot. I probably get really annoying when I do it, but Broadway is my favorite thing in the whole world. And in the 1920s, Broadway was really big with lots of vaudeville type shows. But then in the 1930s, when the WPA was passed, Hollywood kind of took the stage away from Broadway. And so Broadway went from producing about 200 shows a year to about 90 shows a year by 1935. But then in the 1940s, Broadway kind of had a resurrection. And this is what Broadway in the 1940s looked like. It had a lot of the very cliche things people tend to think when they think Broadway. There's usually a cute little romance or like 50s comedy and stuff like that. But from the 1940s, Broadway was really big in the 1940s and 50s and 60s until the 70s and 80s when it kind of had a low point. But then in the 1990s, in the late 80s, Phantom of the Opera came out. In the late 80s, Phantom of the Opera came out. In the 90s, Rent came out. And those are two arguably one of the best shows of all time. And from there spiraled what Broadway is now. And you see, obviously, pictures in color, but you also see more people of color. It's very diverse, more diverse than the 1940s when it comes to the actors, but also the sets, the costumes, the storylines, like everything is just a lot more diverse than it was. But before I start praising Broadway for the amount of diversity that it has right now, this is a graph that I found from QZ.com of the years between 2008 and 2015 of the races of actors. And you can see that for most of the time, about 75% of Broadway actors are white. And it does depend on the show that's being produced, but on shows that are being produced in that current season, but you really see in the masses, there's really all white actors. But some might argue that that's because there are a lot of period pieces on Broadway. But a lot of those period pieces don't even mention anything about race. Race isn't important in a lot of those. Race isn't a huge part of the story. But still, on this graph, you can see non-traditionally cast means a person of color playing a character that would usually just be played by a white actor. You can see that a very low percentage of actors actually a very low percentage of actors of color actually play characters that would usually be played by white actors. And a couple shows that you can see that really could have a lot more people of color in them, but don't, are Waitress, Wicked, The Phantom of the Opera, and Dear Evan Hansen. And these are all very big smash hit shows that don't mention race as an issue. And they have other issues involved in these shows, but they just don't mention race. Now, the quote that I used, we probably all remember this quote. I want to point out the section where she says, they got their church and we got ours. The church could stand as a metaphor for Broadway. The church could be the white people have Broadway, and for a long time, people of color just didn't. And I don't want to say that all casting directors and choreographers and just directors overall are racist. I don't want to put that label on all of them. But I think that there has been a norm that the only successful shows are the ones starring 90% of white actors. But that's not true. That's a very normal norm. That's a norm on Broadway. But you see with shows such as The Lion King, Dreamgirls, Once on This Island, and Hamilton especially, and Rent, that these shows are all more people of color than white actors in them. But they're all huge hits on Broadway. I think most of us have heard of Hamilton, whether you've heard of it off of social media or on the internet, or you've heard about me endlessly talking about it. Hamilton was a huge hit, and it's just proof that it doesn't matter when the certain show takes place. It matters with the representation that you have of characters. I would also like to point out, although this is very un-Broadway related, Black Panther is a huge example of that. Black Panther, they held it back for so many years. They held back production for Black Panther for probably 10 years because they thought no one is going to want to pay to see this show. No one is going to want to see it because it's all African American actors. But Black Panther is currently the #1 highest grossing Marvel movie of all time. And I saw it, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but it really is a work of art on screen. It's beautiful. Basically, if somebody sees a Broadway show, if they respect their opportunity to see that show, and if they actually wanted to see the show, they're going to respect the actors on stage. Because Broadway and being on stage isn't about race. It is about expressing yourself. And if somebody sees that on stage, then they're not going to push it aside because they're a person of color, or vice versa if they're a white person on stage. It's about the performance that they give, and if they give a good performance, then that's the whole point of Broadway. And self-expression is the #1 thing you can have while being on stage.